All right, everybody, week 8, we are cruising. So this is the second and final week of MDMA assisted psychotherapy. And we'll talk a little bit about ethical issues in terms of inclusion, justice, equity, inclusion, and diversity in this space. So we read 2 chapters this week because there was a duplicate reading that I hope was removed at this point. But the manual that you read in week 7 was also linked in week 8. So we had a little bit of a shorter reading list this week, or you were given a second chance to read that article if you didn't, which I covered in our last PowerPoint. So the first article that we read this week was on couple therapy with MDMA and some of the proposed pathways of action. So this was a review of MDMA in its use with couple therapy, but there actually has been one study that's more contemporary done that was published in 2020 by Candice Monson and her colleagues in Toronto. I know I've either been saying Canada or New York. They are in Toronto, Canada. Anyway, so this is more so a review. If you're interested in actually reading through that protocol or better understanding that study, it is available. I literally just looked it up to check. I'm like, where is Candice Monson? And it's an open access. So anyway, talking about MDMA assisted couple therapy, this is a unique type of experience, as I mentioned last week, where MDMA is more of an empathogen than psilocybin. So it allows for a deep sense of connectivity. And another unique aspect about MDMA to psilocybin is that it does encourage one to talk. So you can engage in a little bit more of what would be considered traditional talk therapy, though it is another thing, like I've been mentioning and hopefully really emphasizing with this line of work, is really being non-directive. That doesn't mean not being present. That doesn't mean not doing work, but you are doing your best to stay out of your client's way or your participants or patient's way, because the thought with psychedelics is that it's unlocking an internal wisdom. And with too much, analysis or intellect, you're actually taking away from the experience. So it has the possibility of healing and transformation within the context of a couple. MDMA does, and it recognizes that individuals exist in a milieu and offers the potential for transformation in their lived experiences. So that we're all unique, and that MDMA allows for this wisdom that is inherent in us to be unlocked. So in this article, they talked about the neurochemical, psychological, and subjective effects. I'll cover that today. And then just further understanding MDMA in a couples context. So another thing in this article, because this is an area that I'm interested in exploring as a couple and family therapist, is every single psychedelic that is being researched right now is for an indication. So that means, MDMA for PTSD, psilocybin for addiction, ketamine for treatment-resistant depression. And so it's not a focus of any of the research, or potentially, I don't know if this is even like on the horizon for any of these substances, is to just be used as an adjunct for therapy. So really what Dr. Wagner is wanting to happen with this is that maybe MDMA can be used, just for couples. Because as couple and family therapists, some of us in the class who are couple and family therapists know we hang out in the V codes and Z codes. So if we're working with insurance, in many ways, we have to have an IP and identified patient to be able to bill. And many times that diagnosis it's not quite accurate. The DSM doesn't really honor relational distress, or doesn't really honor how, people may not have these intrapsychic things happening with them, but they inevitably affect a person's relationship. So for what it's worth, this is really Wagner's trying to champion using psychedelics when somebody might not have a diagnosis. So in terms of treatment modalities that can be used with MDMA, so think about this when we're talking about treatment modalities, that this is in preparation. So in the actual administration, really no therapy is used, or extremely person-centered, non-directive approaches are used. Encouraging this very present experience with the participant, with the client, with the patient, where you're not analyzing, you're not trying to restructure anything, you are not using cognitive behavioral, you're not using integrative, you're not using emotion focused. This is all in the setup for that experience. And then if there are multiple administrations, because MDMA tends to have between 1 and 3. If you're in between, for example, administration 1 and 2 or administration 2 and 3, that's when you might also be engaging in this as well, because in between 1 and 2 and 2 and 3, those serve as a preparation / integration. You've already done it, so we're going to integrate some of that, but another one is coming up. So let's prepare you for that. All right, so some more on this. I talked a little bit about this last week, but there is a historical context with this. MDMA-assisted therapy was conducted prior to when it became illegal in the 1980s. Greer and Tolbear demonstrated improvements in fear of emotional hurt, communication, and introspection. So remember, I'll cover this in the next slide, but there are very key parts of the brain that MDMA has an effect on. And one of them is the amygdala, where in some ways it's almost like it puts a shield around the amygdala, or maybe like a really heavy weighted blanket around the amygdala, so that your fear center isn't so activated. And so MDMA was historically used in non-research settings, like relatively prominently. So it has the potential for enhancing communication and navigating relational issues, which is ultimately what we do in couples therapy. Like, how many, why do people come to couples therapy? For communication and relational issues of a whole slew of things, and I mean, we know that these are the essentially 2 reasons why. So if we have access to something, which we don't have access to it yet, but if we were to have access to something that could really assist in that process, why would we not do that? So there have been some follow-ups with MDMA trials where they've gone back to the participants to see, and they have shown improved relationships with loved ones. Almost 2/3 of participants reported positive changes in their relationships following treatment. So like I said, in Canada, it has the only contemporary study to date where MDMA was used as an adjunct for cognitive behavioral conjoint therapy, specifically for PTSD. So there was a pilot trial. The results were published in 2020. And this was the first time in psychedelic research, in modern day psychedelic research, where MDMA or any substance was administered to both partners in a couple. You'll also be able to see, this speaks to some of the ethical things that I'll be talking about later in this presentation about the population that this pilot trial had. So all heterosexual couples, I believe they were all white, all higher SES. So again, it's not that that's bad data, it just is potentially not generalizable. And pilot trials aren't necessarily meant to be that, but it does really speak to some of the struggles that we are having as a whole in this field in terms of including a diversity of people regarding age, religion, race, sexual orientation, gender identity. A lot of the, there is a lack of representation. So in this study, they found some promising finding, including decreases in PTSD scores, higher relationship satisfaction as measured by, I believe it was RDAS or maybe just the DAS, but it was either the revised dyadic adjustment scale or just the dyadic adjustment scale. Post-traumatic growth, so measuring, was there growth after the traumatic event that was in a positive way? Was there potentially like not necessarily even a reframing of the trauma, but something that may have manifested positively after that, and social intimacy for the partner that has PTSD or was diagnosed with PTSD, which was a requirement to be a part of this study. And then another, like I said, Wagner's really championing in this article the potential for non-diagnostic MDMA-assisted couple therapy. So this pilot trial suggests the potential for MDMA-assisted couple therapy beyond specific diagnoses. Again, generally, we don't have diagnoses coming in as a couple, like as a relational diagnosis, because the DSM doesn't really have those. And significant improvements in relationally oriented outcome measures support its effectiveness. All right, so let's talk a little bit about just like addressing some of the stuff that's going on pharmacologically. So again, MDMA is an empathogen, which means that there's increased empathy for self and others. So if you think about this in terms of relationships, like to me, that's really one of the things that we need to be more connected to one another. And in many ways to heal a lot of the stuff that brings us to therapy and potentially prevents a lot of the stuff that brings people to therapy. So the neurochemical experience of love, there's hormones and neurotransmitters associated with love that are affected: oxytocin, vasopressin, dopamine, and serotonin. MDMA functions on all of that, as well as norepinephrine. So so with oxytocin, vasopressin, dopamine, and serotonin, oxytocin and vasopressin, they are linked to attachment and bonding. Dopamine and serotonin are with pleasure and positive mood. The amygdala is the area of the brain that registers threat, happiness, and fear. The prefrontal cortex is related to reasoning. The hippocampus is engagement with thoughts and memories. The caudate nucleus registers love, and the hypothalamus registers lust. So all aspects of like the bonding experience. And then let's see here. I just basically covered similarities in action. Context dependent nature. So the interaction between oxytocin and vasopressin is contextually dependent. So that's where set and setting are very important in terms of creating that trust and that calming environment. And so MDMA has the potential for reactivating or remembering these neurochemical pathways on how oxytocin and vasopressin can like in some ways work together. And then this also MDMA also increases cortisol And I practiced this before, noradrenergic, noradrenergic responses, and raises arousal levels. So a little bit of the stress hormone that is the stress hormone that is activated, as well as noradrenaline. And it supports motivation to engage in therapy and interact with the partner, because again, it's an empathogen. It encourages us to talk as well, which are the empathy and talking, two of the things that we want to happen in therapy. Okay, so in terms of psychological impact, there's with this study, there are several pathways of action that contribute to therapeutic outcomes. And what Dr. Wagner is doing is synthesizing literature on MDMA's psychological impact. And then when she looked at this, 4 broad areas of impact is where she talked about, and I'm going to talk about these in subsequent slides, are the areas of emotion, cognition, behavior, and somatic experience. And there are, so these areas lead to 8 across therapeutic outcomes for MDMA assisted couple therapy with empathy, where MDMA facilitates the experience of empathy between partners, and it enhances understanding and emotional resonance. Like, I'm really resonating with that. You're bringing people together. It affects communication, where MDMA improves communication within the couple. It promotes honest and open dialogue. Perception of social connection and support. MDMA enhances the perception of social connection and support, and it fosters a sense of being understood and validated. Non-avoidance. MDMA reduces avoidant behaviors within the couple. This is largely due to its impact on the amygdala. It encourages facing difficult emotions and issues. It promotes openness, a sense of openness and vulnerability. It facilitates sharing and deepening of emotional experiences. It also increases and affects safety and attachment. It enhances feelings of attachment and safety in the relationships and strengthens the bond between partners. With bonding and social intimacy, MDMA facilitates bonding and social intimacy. It creates a deeper sense of closeness and connection, and it increases relationship satisfaction. So MDMA assisted couple therapy improves overall relationship satisfaction and enhances the quality of fulfillment in the relationship. Like, doesn't this all just sound magical? I would love to have this assist in my couples work. Okay, so in terms of emotions, there's the perception of emotional expression. MDMA facilitates the perception of positive emotional expression and reduces the social pain associated with negative emotional responses and social rejection. So think about this. What holds us back in some ways from, or what is a barrier to kind of touching some of these more difficult emotions, is in some ways the self-judgment about that. Like, I'm judging myself for being sad about something. I'm judging myself for struggling with something. And in many ways, we judge ourselves from a internalization of the judgment that we've received societally, or the messages that we've received societally. So MDMA in many ways kind of guards against that and allows us, from a narrative standpoint, to have our local knowledge, and allows us to, utilize that wisdom within and just like be present in that experience. MDMA improves empathy and the identification of emotion in others. Oh my gosh, like what a beautiful thing to be able to be attuned to others. It increases pro-social feelings and attention to positive emotional cues. MDMA allows for experiencing of challenging emotions in therapy. So again, with that effects on the brain, and again, the barrier with the amygdala, or like the protection with the amygdala, when we think about, so again, we know about this in terms of couples therapy and PTSD. Dr. Wagner's talking a little bit more generally here, but if you think about, what are we worried about in touching some of these challenging emotions? One, we can be kind of worried about like hurting our partner if maybe we have some constructive feedback for them, or sharing with them a way that they've hurt us, or just touching some of that. So think about this also in terms of PTSD. These challenging emotions can be outside of one's window of tolerance. Because I think another thing with MDMA is it just really widens, it like makes it longer or like taller and wider, our window of tolerance in terms of being able to be in a place that feels safe, where normally we might do something like dissociate, or normally we might experience something like re-traumatization or have a re-experiencing. That doesn't happen in the with the use of MDMA. MDMA also increases compassion, decreases defensiveness, it reduces anxiety and facilitates closeness to others. And all of this isn't, so this is another thing to keep in mind, is this also is allowed with the help of set and setting. So please never forget the importance of set and setting and the trust and the bond that is built from you, the guide, to the participants, patients, clients. So this isn't just like I pop MDMA and all of these things magically happen. Yes, it has effects on the brain, but this is primed. The reason I truly believe, and other researchers believe, that the reason we're seeing these positive effects with psychedelics is not just the psychedelic and its effects, like physiological effects, but also the setup, the preparation for this experience with the guides. So that's why you're very important. MDMA facilitates the sharing of emotional content and improves closeness and satisfaction in couple therapy. MDMA supports this experience by attenuating the fear response and reducing defensiveness, again, amygdala. Beautiful thing, very difficult thing in terms of creating connections. MDMA allows for an unfettered experience of emotion and the present moment. So one of the things that we don't do so well as humans is being present and being attuned to our own experience. This MDMA facilitates that, and it minimizes the influence of old memories, the drive to be right or heard, or distress. So it minimizes the influence of old memories, allowing for you to be very presently focused. And in many ways, that drive to be right or heard is really a barrier to connection, right? So empathy is in many ways the antithesis of that. If I am not looking to be right, I'm not looking to listen, to respond. I'm just present with you. All right, so some cognitions. MDMA facilitates the engagement in difficult memories, and it reduces the perception of threat and increases interpersonal trust. MDMA also provides clarity of thought without becoming overwhelmed by emotions, and allows for cognitive processing without being hindered by the emotional process. So again, remember, in psychedelic experiences during that administration, this happens very spontaneously. So we learned about that last week, of like cognitive restructuring, for example. You don't need somebody to sit there and be asking questions. You don't have to have this round of Socratic questioning to be able to kind of, dig down into the cognitive distortions, the core beliefs, the stigma or the schemas. This just happens many times. So you don't have to force this process. Many times it happens spontaneously. So neuroimaging results suggest that negative memories may be perceived as more tolerable following MDMA. So basically how we know this is the areas of the brain that are activated with negative memory, when negative memories are remembered, there's not as much activity. It enhances the ability to engage with memories, including those with strong emotional content. Again, I think, when we think about trauma work, for example, one of the things that we're trying to create is dissidence. We're trying to create a sense of distance from, I am no longer in that traumatic experience. I am somewhere else. I am safe. So MDMA helps facilitate that distance, that dissonance. MDMA increases reported perception of trust. It supports positive cognitive processes and interpersonal dynamics. So when you also think about this, it enhances things like the benefit of the doubt. our perceptions are more positive, our attributions are more positive. Evidence suggests that MDMA reopens a critical learning period for social interaction, which is so beautiful. And it offers the opportunity for new learning to occur in the context of social interactions. So just, as we age, our brain does become a little bit more rigid, but again, neuroplasticity is very possible, particularly with psychedelics, but it just allows for us to be a little bit more open when generally through our lives, we become a little bit more closed. All right, so some behaviors. MDMA increases the use of social and sexual words in speech. So I just think about this with couples that are in some ways like struggling with sex. I don't want to necessarily say sexually repressed, but it's just like in some ways kind of this taboo thing. I have so many couples that come in and like it's very clear to me that sex is an issue, like their sexual aspect of the relationship is an issue, but they just like can't touch it. So imagine just kind of like popping the lid on that and allowing that conversation. But then remember, it's so MDMA is used with PTSD and individuals who are struggling with PTSD to help block some of that intrapsychic, like again, re-traumatization, the re-experiencing, becoming triggered, and the potential to dissociate. But remember with MDMA and its facilitation of language is when the other person in the room is also under the influence of MDMA, that they are protected as well. So it's like this mutual protection from the other person's words. So again, if you think about, there's this positive attribution, there's this positive perception that, like I'm just thinking about if somebody were to, like you have this couple that historically doesn't share about sex, they don't talk about it, and then they start talking about it and maybe like some of the frustrations or like the desires, that their partner is not going to take that defensively, that partner's not going to take that as a dig, because you are so filled with love for your partner that that's going to be reflected in the language that you use. So in some ways it's like, it's a protection of hurt all around the room. So going back to what I was saying before about PTSD, one of the benefits of having like a partner or a loved one also under the influence of MDMA with a person who is experiencing PTSD, it protects that person against vicarious traumatization. I don't think we talk about that enough in our field, where as therapists, there's a good likelihood of us being vicariously traumatized by the stories that we hear from our clients. So this allows some of that protection. So it enhances interpersonal focus and language, facilitates deeper engagement and connection with others. MDMA has been shown to increase cooperative behaviors. Again, that positive attribution, positive perception. It promotes collaboration and positive interactions. MDMA reduces avoidance of challenging emotional and cognitive content, really helpful therapeutically, allows for the engagement with difficult topics without disorientation. So again, no dissociation, no kind of whirling, I'm lost in my trauma. I'm lost in this experience, I'm no longer present. That's what it helps guard against. It also leads to increased openness to experiences. I mean, in many ways, that's what we need when we talk about trauma, of like an openness to go to that. And it facilitates greater engagement, risk-taking, and vulnerability in interpersonal relationships, which increases bonding, which increases satisfaction. It's this beautiful effect. And then finally, the somatic experiences with MDMA. So MDMA can induce strong physiological sensations linked to past experiences. But again, remember, so when we think about re-experiencing, that can be terrifying. But again, when there is decreased activation in parts of our brain that indicate threat, then the experiencing is much more neutral. So it's not it's not these sensations that bring terror. It's a different experience with MDMA than like what we think about when we think about re-experiencing. And so it is thought that re-experiencing these sensations, again, with some of these like life jackets on of, the dampening of activity in some of the areas of the brain, that it can be helpful therapeutically. There are somatic effects of MDMA that can be connected to cognitive and emotional content, including memories. And MDMA supports the integration of somatic experiences into the therapeutic process. So again, if you think about trauma work, what are some of the areas that we want to highlight? We want to utilize the somatic therapies. We want the person to become reattuned with themselves. We want them to be feeling. We want them to be aware of their body and feel connected to their body. MDMA can induce soothing and calming somatic effects. It provides a supportive and comforting experience for individuals and couples. So again, it's like this cozy blanket that can be wrapped around you. And I'm saying all of these things in ideal conditions, in like perfect conditions. I'm not saying, again, that this automatically happens. This is with the hard work of a guide. This is with the hard work of a team and building that trust and safety within the experience. As we know, like MDMA has a lower propensity for this, of like any scary experiences or what would be considered like adverse therapeutic events or just adverse events. But that doesn't mean that this is going to happen all the time in terms of these positive outcomes or positive effects. So just know, again, we as the guides and the set and setting that we help promote and facilitate is super important in this. MDMA, as I've said, it reduces the fear response, allowing for greater tolerance of somatic experience. And so again, that window of tolerance is expanded in all senses of the word, and it facilitates the immersion in difficult somatic sensations when necessary. This is one thing, that attunement to body, attunement to self is one of the things that can be very difficult for individuals. And this really facilitates that. And it's thought to be very healing in those, particularly for trauma. Brain imaging studies show increased reward responses to happy facial expression and decreased reactivity to angry expressions after MDMA. So this is one of the residual effects of MDMA. So again, the areas of the brain that would light up, like when you see a happy face, it's like if it would light up normally, it lights up even more with MDMA. If you see an area of the brain that would light up for reactivity to an angry expression, it's less. And it supports the tolerance and understanding of emerging somatic experiences. Okay, so Dr. Wagner talks about the SET model. So multiple S's, multiple E's, multiple T's in this, but SET for simplicity. So setting, we've talked about this, is that is establishing the therapeutic setting that's conducive to safety, comfort, and privacy. Also creating an environment that supports open communication and vulnerability. Then she also adds here, so we have set and setting all the time in psychedelic therapy, but she also talks about structure and safety. So this is providing a structured framework for therapy sessions. That really is what we do in clinical research, like the clinical research trials. Is we work from a manual. It is structured in that way, but that's more so for fidelity. She's saying this for just like safety and predictability in this. And then of course, ensuring physical and emotional safety for both individuals and the couples. As we read last week in the MDMA manual, like no touching unless it is you are asking permission, you are given consent, and you have prepared your participant for the possibility of that. So it is just like disheartening how people will take advantage of others who are in vulnerable states. So like, don't touch your clients or participants or patients unless you have asked and you have let them know this is for grounding purposes. Like no sexual shit in this. And unfortunately, it's something that to me, unfortunately, has to be very explicitly stated. So then she talks about the E of exploration and experience. This is facilitating the exploration of emotions, thoughts, and memories within that MDMA experience. and encouraging individuals to engage in the present moment. So again, this is where MDMA naturally kind of like dampens the presence of memories, or like the yeah, I mean, it just keeps you more presently focused, and then you're able to fully experience the effects of MDMA. Then with T, she talks about template and trust. So template, this is utilizing the insights and shifts in perspective gained during the MDMA sessions to develop a template for healthier relational patterns. So this is integration. Template and trust are with integration. Well, trust is throughout, but template is really integration. And then identifying and challenging maladaptive beliefs and behaviors. So you can see some CBT coming in here. And then with trust, cultivating trust between the couple and the therapist, and fostering a sense of trust within the relationship through open and honest communication. So one of the things that I always talk to my students about in terms of couples therapy is there are ultimately 1, 2, 3, 4 alliances that are in a couple with 2 people. So if at the top is I'm the therapist, and like on the corners here, and are each of the couple, or like each of the partners in the couple, the therapist has an alliance with each individual person. The therapist has an alliance with the relationship. So that's 3, but the most important alliance that's in the room is the alliance within the couple. So this is what it's talking about, is it's touching on each of those parts of the alliance. Okay, so the structure of therapy. You want to start with a thorough assessment. You're conducting a comprehensive assessment to understand the couple's commitment levels, distress levels, any co-occurring mental health challenges, and therapy goals. Then you're gaining insight into the couple's history and identifying their particular strengths and challenges. You do a collaborative case conceptualization. So you're engaging in feedback and collaborative discussions to develop a shared understanding of the couple's case. This doesn't mean like collaborative with colleagues. This is collaborative with the couple. You are formulating a case conceptualization that guides the therapeutic process. So if you don't have a good conceptualization of the couple, you are already at a disadvantage, because you're likely going to be doing things that are irrelevant. Then you are preparing the preparation sessions. You're conducting a series of psychotherapy sessions focused on preparation. That is standard in psychedelic therapy. You are creating a shared language and participating or practicing empathetic or empathic communication skills. You are setting intentions for MDMA sessions and providing practical preparation guidance. So this is very standard in terms of preparation, but this is in the context of a relationship. Then in the MDMA session, and like when the actual administration, you're facilitating open and agenda-free experiences. So I always say you're getting out of their way, and you're serving as a facilitator for conversation, ensuring both individuals have opportunities for deep internal reflection and communication together. So with MDMA, it really is a combination of this like deep internal experience, as you read in the MDMA manual, that there are still headphones and eye shades available for some of this inner work, because again, they're under the influence of MDMA for 8 hours. And then the integration sessions, you're conducting these sessions to process the experiences of the MDMA session. You're inquiring about any insights, fostering empathy, and discussing shared experiences. And you're applying and exploring the learnings within the context of the couple's goals and future interactions. So very aligned with, standard psychotherapy or talk therapy. And then some principles of practice. So setting structure and safety. You want to create a safe physical and emotional setting for deep emotional exploration, establishing safety guidelines for disagreements and promoting nonviolence. We call these ground rules in couples work or any sort of relational work, developing shared intentions for the session and providing space for integration. So you want it to be in some ways like this team effort, but you do want to allow for some of that autonomy, some of that individuality for individual intentions, as well as intentions for the couple, like that they're going to be focusing on as a couple. Then exploring an experience, you are fostering curiosity, openness, and non-avoidance of emotions and experiences. You are encouraging full expression and communication of emotions. This is during the MDMA session. You are recapitulating insights and gains throughout the therapeutic process. So you are wanting during integration to touch on that again. For template and trust, you are creating a template for effective communication and navigating intense emotional experiences, not only like within the, like what, in some ways what they've learned in the MDMA session, but this is creating a template for future. So when they don't have therapy, you know, you want them to have these tools that they can carry with them as a couple. You're also fostering trust and openness to whatever emerges in therapy and highlighting the strengths in the relationship and their ability to navigate stressors. So that's that reading. Then we read about culturally informed research design issues in a study for MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for PTSD. So in terms of addressing trauma and PTSD, so PTSD describes symptoms that arise after experiencing or witnessing a traumatic event. There are various populations that are at risk, including survivors of violent acts, disaster responders, victims of abuse, survivors of abuse, however they want to be addressed, combat veterans, and marginalized ethnic groups. So really the highlight of this, and like to me the main message is, again, we're talking about indications here, and sometimes there are experiences of trauma that don't reach criteria for a diagnosis of PTSD. So in some ways, individuals who could really benefit from something like MDMA-assisted psychotherapy, they don't qualify for studies. So there is an importance, really what the authors are wanting to drive home in this is the importance of addressing trauma in marginalized ethnic groups. And in many ways, these microaggressions, these traumas that are more insidious and can be cumulative, and in some ways constant or consistent, and how those are extremely important to address and to acknowledge, because in many ways these types of traumas are not really honored or acknowledged because of our conceptualization of our like kind of medicalized conceptualization of this. So just thinking about African Americans, Hispanic and Latinx Americans, Native Americans, immigrants, and refugees that face unique traumas, again, that may not meet criteria. It may not be acute. It may not be this event. Again, it may be more insidious than that. And there are equity and health implications for society. We know these types of things in terms of increased cortisol production of, if we think about this from a capitalistic lens, which we can't help it, but living here in America, like a loss of productivity, a loss of revenue generation. But in terms of equity, if this is not something that is honored or acknowledged in the field of mental health of this type of trauma, and if we're not trained of how to address it, this is absolutely an equity issue. And it has health implications, not only in terms of physical health, but mental health for a good amount of Americans. So another thing that these authors are wanting is an expansion, or at least an acknowledgement of MAPS. So they're talking specifically about MDMA, like the biggest kind of gatekeeper, and what's the word I'm looking for? Person who that sponsors MDMA studies is MAPS. So MAPS is looking to make MDMA psychotherapy a legal prescription medication. And what the authors were talking about is, up to now, there are phase 3 trials that are currently being conducted, but there is very little representation, very little diversity in this work thus far. So there are benefits to MDMA-assisted psychotherapy. It augments psychotherapeutic work by reducing fear of traumatic memories and increasing trust and compassion. As we know, in 2017, the FDA granted MDMA a breakthrough therapy designation. So this essentially expedites the process of review. And as they stated, there's a lack of diversity in MDMA research. Communities of color experience high rates of PTSD, but are underrepresented in psychedelic research. And there are ethical concerns and the need for inclusivity and safety and efficacy studies. So again, we are saying like MDMA is great, but we're also saying that with a specific population. So there's the potential that this doesn't translate, and there's lots of reasons for that. So how do we create culturally informed adaptations? So this really was a blueprint in many ways of how do we increase representation, diversity, equity, inclusion? How do we have this justice lens when we are conducting all aspects of this research? So the first is enhancing diversity. So this is having a diverse staff in recruitment retention. This is something in Alabama that my postdoc mentor and I really tried to focus on in terms of the representation of our lab. And I'll be honest, it didn't go great. We had a lot of people in the lab who looked like me and looked like my mentor. He is a white man as well. Well, I'm not a white man, but he is white as well, and he's a man. But anyway, that representation and that can really increase safety. There are people who look like me that I'm not worried about being exploited. There are many individuals from marginalized communities that fear or feel uncomfortable in the mental health system. And think about this, a lot of the research that's being conducted is in institutions that generally have medical centers connected to them. And there's been a lot of not only mental health exploitation and serious harm, but really serious physical health exploitation and harm. The benefits of a diverse team, it emphasizes the impact of a diverse staff on recruitment, participant comfort and engagement. And then there's the example from UConn of the research team that demonstrates the benefit of having a diverse team in terms of cultural understanding and effective client work. So in terms of enhancing diversity through outreach and recruitment, really what they highlighted here was the need for targeted outreach and recruitment efforts to increase diversity in participant population. And they emphasized the limitations of existing methods and the importance of addressing the concerns and experiences of communities of color. And the use of tailored recruitment materials. So you saw that they made a different flyer. The other one was like very bland. But again, MAPS has no problem recruiting people. They're just recruiting the same type of people. And that community outreach needs to be a part of that. That is not something that is standard within MAPS recruitment procedures, is this community outreach that really does necessitate some education about PTSD, education about the study process. So we did a ton of community outreach in our study, and I was going to shelters, to services, to organizations, giving talks, fielding a lot of questions about, because we went to something called Task, and I talked about this a few weeks ago, which is a like an alternative to incarceration for nonviolent offenders. So the vast majority of individuals are there with like drug charges, possession charges, distribution charges. So they were like, well, we get tested for substances. Does this show up on a test? Am I going to get in trouble? Like, is anybody going to know that I'm a part of this? Is this a violation of my probation? So there's lots of valid questions, and being able to address these fears, field these concerns, because again, there's just a safety, a higher sense of safety in medical settings when you are a white person. So we really do, in many ways in this field, take that for granted, as the majority of us who are conducting the research are also white. And then cultural sensitivity. Are you going to be able to attend to the stuff that I bring? You and I we potentially look different. Are you going to get it? So these are all really important. And then here, another thing that they also requested was, so some, there's flyers. So sometimes people like call in, or, they respond to something online. And so they're encouraging people to ask for demographic information to make sure that there is representation in the, so if people reach out like via email, they were like, here's a kind of a stock response that you can give to them, but ask them about their race, ethnicity, age, ask them about these demographics so we can get some more representation in the studies. So ensuring fair compensation for participants, it's important, particularly those facing any sort of economic disadvantage. And what they highlighted was the role of compensation in addressing barriers to participation and building trust, because many times this is a sacrifice participating. This is long hours. Again, think about just one MDMA session is an entire day. So if you have a job where it's not as flexible, like how can we compensate you fairly that's not coercive, but that also does make this not a sacrifice on your end. So there was an example of a compensation structure here, and the preference for cash payments they mentioned that to provide like a concrete illustration of, don't give them checks. Sometimes people don't have checking accounts. If you can give them cash, unfortunately, there's institutional barriers with that. Like at UAB, we would have to give what's called a CLIN card. So they were given like this, it looks like just a credit card, but you load it electronically with cash, like a cash amount. But then they would have to so you could use it kind of anywhere. And in many ways, one of the fears of the institution, because institutions are just out of touch, they're just frustratingly out of touch. So we were requesting that, because we thought about all of this stuff when we were creating the study, and when we were executing the study, of saying like, hey, these are individuals who don't have bank accounts, because they were wanting to give them something where they'd have to like access it through a bank. And we're like, why are we making this so hard? Like, they're helping us in terms of moving forward the medical field, and professionally. Like, this is an assist professionally to us as well. Like, why are we not reciprocating this? Where we asked for cash and they were worried that they would use that for drugs. It's like, okay, just like this stigma and this stuff of people who are in decision-making positions who are just so out of touch, and it's very frustrating. But I think that in this article, they really beautifully illustrate those institutional struggles. Okay, so building trust and addressing barriers. So there's challenges in the initial screening, particularly in establishing trust and addressing any sort of cultural stigma or struggles. So they really talk about the initial screening, the person taking their time, and also in that screening process, having people who would actually be conducting the preparation and integration sessions be like introducing themselves. My Dr. Hendricks and I did the exact same thing. As soon as they came in, hi, I'm Dr. Lappin, because it is interesting how this can be also culturally informed, where I tend to like to introduce myself, what I would consider informally, as Sarah. But many people want to know that they're working with doctors. So I would say, hi, my name is Dr. Lappin. You can call me Sarah. Or I also answer to Sarah. I think I said that because I didn't want it to be like, I am bestowing you with the honor of calling me by my first name. So I think I would say, I also answer to Sarah, of, just giving them some options and having them feel hopefully kind of secure in some of my training and trusting me in that way, but also like wanting to build that rapport of that, like just person to person contact, or yeah. And so this emphasizes the importance of dedicated time, rapport building, and psychoeducation to facilitate the screening process for participants of color. And then collecting demographic information is mentioned as this additional step to ensure diversity and inclusion in the study. So just being very thoughtful about that inclusion. So the informed consent process really is about building trust and establishing clarity. So you need to take time. So there's this formal discussion, but it needs to be conversational and approachable. So one of the things that I really appreciated in this, of tailoring language, so that you're minimizing any potential like trigger words like research, where you can change that to more neutral terms like project or study. And then just thinking about that in terms of like the history with African Americans in America, and then the history and I mean, they're not, it's history and it's also current. So I don't want to talk about these things as if like in the past these things happened, but now we really got a hold of it. Like they're still ongoing, but I'm talking about like the historical origins of that informing current practices and thoughts and stuff. And then thinking about that also with Latino Americans who are, so you're not wanting like, I can't remember exactly what the terms were, but like a test or experiment or something like that, where there can be some, triggers in that in terms of, fears of persecution through, what am I trying to say? What is it, like an agency like ICE or something like that. So just, really being aware of like these words really matter. So you want to have a conversational and educational approach to this, really taking the time, answering any questions, kind of ensuring. One of the things that one of our participants shared with us when they were like, they had gotten all the way to the administration, and this was an African American man, and he like laid down, he had been given the psilocybin, and he was starting to feel the effects of it, and he was like, I think he said like, what did y'all white people do to me? And he was just nervous. And I think even though we had worked for over a month at this point, we had been working with him and, fielding questions, assuring him, trying to build that rapport and safety, checking in with him outside of our time together in the lab, where we conducted our preparation sessions, there was still this, undercurrent of skepticism. And so, in many ways, we were grateful for that, of the ability to like repair that and attend to that. I mean, he was fine, but that a little bit of an anxiety came out of like, oh no, have I been duped? I remember, I can't remember if I told you y'all this story, but I went to pick up, many of our participants really struggled with transportation. That was a barrier to their participation. So my postdoc mentor and I were like, you know what, we're going to eliminate this barrier and we're going to drive people around. So we would go to their homes and pick them up and bring them to the lab. And one time I went to pick up a woman who had previous experience within the criminal justice system. So she had been incarcerated, I believe for cocaine possession or something like that. And so I picked her up and needed to hop on the interstate to get to our lab. And I had taken one exit too soon on accident. I think I was trying to, not use the GPS or something like that. And that exit was to the local jail. And so she's normally really talkative, and she got super quiet. And then we got to the lab and she was like, oh, Miss Sarah, like, I thought that you were going to take me to jail. And I was like, what? She was like, yeah, when you took that exit, I knew that wasn't the exit to UAB. It was the exit to the jail. And I thought, oh no, like they've been gathering all this information for me to go to jail. Like they thought that there was a possibility that we were in cahoots with law enforcement. And just like these little things, because we really did work to build that trust, and just there's an inherent mistrust. It might have been because I'm white. It might have been because I'm affiliated with an institution. I don't know, but the fact is, like, I was again very grateful that she shared that, and that was an opportunity to ensure the safety and ensure that that trust. Okay, so set and setting, creating a welcoming environment. So this slide really is talking about the importance of set and setting and psychedelic experiences with a focus on social context, cultural sensitivity or humility, and the role of music. So there's a need to create a welcoming environment through diverse decor and tailored music playlists with respect to the participants' cultural backgrounds and preferences. So at this time, things are pretty standardized in terms of research, but there's a hope that, you know, there are protocols that allow for some personalization of this, because the only thing that like we personalized for the participant was having them bring in any sort of like trinkets or pictures of people that were supportive and that would bring them some like peace and comfort during their experience. So this, for this section of training the team members, they're talking about the importance of training members through a culturally informed lens and through culturally informed practices. They emphasize a multicultural approach at UConn through the functional analytic psychotherapy. There's a diversity training for that, where you know, they talked about microaggressions, and it addressed and uncovered like their personal biases and how to respond to racially charged material with empathy. So there's a focus on justice, validation, cultural humility. And then they also underscore the ongoing nature of cultural competence and the commitment to continuous learning and growth. So you don't become culturally competent, you're always becoming more culturally competent. So capturing trauma due to racism or racial trauma. So they emphasize an importance of assessing for this. And I included in the, where I normally put the PowerPoints, I also put the supplemental materials for this. That includes the unrests assessment, as well as some questions that they ask one another for gauging cultural competence. So unrest is a tool for capturing experiences of racism. It emphasizes the broad scope of the measure and its usefulness in better understanding participants' histories of racial trauma and other forms of stigmatization. And then they also underscore the significance of assessing racial trauma to gain a comprehensive understanding of the participants' experience and the impact of racism and oppression. And again, these experiences may not meet DSM-5 criterion, but they contribute to participants' lived experiences, of course, because I mean, why would we exclude people from the DSM? I mean, crazy. So they're talking about the independent raters. So I think they said like, you know, 90+% of independent raters through MAPS trials are white. So that just brings a specific lens. And so they highlight the importance of training for independent raters in developing cultural competency and addressing potential biases and assessing PTSD diagnoses. And then they emphasize the efforts made to enhance diversity within the rater pool and provide comprehensive training on topics related to racial, ethnic, and cultural differences. And then they also mention ongoing training, knowledge sharing, and the challenges faced in meeting participant preferences while ensuring random assignment. So they talked about like a Caribbean woman who dropped out of the study because she didn't get a African-American, I think it was a woman rater. So, you know, unfortunately, these are things that we can't always control in that. So emphasizing the importance of diversity and cultural competence in various aspects of the trials, along with the needs to address any sort of limitations and biases. And they give, you know, how can this information in terms of key considerations for participation and retention, the importance of discussing limitations and obstacles, and ongoing review of self-correction, because they even talked about that in theirs, where, you know, we wish we kind of would have consulted on some of these aspects and that would have helped along the way. And then how can all of these implications benefit phase 3 trials and like studying MDMA as a whole in all of the sites that are happening worldwide. And then opening access and promoting diversity. They talk about the expanded access program and the importance of increasing diversity among therapy providers and efforts to promote accessibility and affordability of MDMA assisted psychotherapy. Because, you know, at this point, I think this was written in like I think this is a 2020, I'm not sure. But like, and this is still a accurate estimation of the cost of this treatment is like $15,000. It's just like absurd. So that's not going to be accessible to people who would like really benefit from that. So they also talk about the need for future psychedelic therapists to possess cultural competence. And again, this is not just for people of color. Culture is all over the place. And this also isn't just for white people. Like, it's not just white people who need to be culturally competent, or people with privilege to be culturally competent. This is for everybody who is in this line of work. Every interaction that we have is inherently transcultural. So also recognizing that this is highly important when somebody is they're vulnerable and in a non-ordinary state of consciousness, that there's definite risk for exploitation in that realm. So they want training and certification in this area, and then the competencies that should be required to work ethically and responsibly with individuals from diverse backgrounds. And they talk particularly about people of color because that's the focus of this article. And the focus is on understanding cultural variations, identifying trauma related to discrimination and oppression, building rapport, engaging in discussions about race, and addressing personal biases. So last but not least, in terms of equity and diversity, they highlight the need for a culturally informed approach in psychedelic therapies to promote equity and diversity, and acknowledge the insufficiency of current processes providing access to people of color, and recognizing the leadership of MAPS is including diverse populations in their research. They are making a concerted effort. And then, like, they conclude with emphasizing the ongoing work needed to ensure inclusion and meet the needs of diverse populations and diverse individuals. And they urge other groups to follow suit in promoting diversity and inclusion in psychedelic research.